Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Hakim Meshreki, Assistant Professor of Marketing and Academic Director of the SEMS Master in International Management at AUC School of Business. I hope you're all keeping well, staying safe in these testing times. It's an honor to welcome you all to this webinar today, which is the first in the Willard Brown International Business Leadership webinar. This series of unique webinars that take place this academic year. The series brings you renowned and distinguished speakers from all over the world. Today's webinar, titled How Chinese Multinationals Are Conquering the World, has not one, but two distinguished speakers. Joining us from New York is Professor Loudres Casanova, Senior Lecturer and the Gail and Rob Canizares Director of the Emerging Markets Institute and the Johnson School of Management and Cornell University. And from Geneva, Professor Miroux, Faculty Fellow at the Emerging Markets Institute at the Johnson School of Management at Cornell University as well. Professor Casanova and Miroux have co-authored the book titled The Era of Chinese Multinationals, Competing for Global Dominance, which captures the forces driving the disruptive growth of Chinese multinational corporations. And today, we'll be hearing from them and discussing more about the subject and its implication on many fronts, the local, the regional, and the international economy. If you have any questions during the session, please write them in the Q&A section in the box. Thank you all. We hope you'll enjoy our today's webinar. Professor Casanova, Professor Miroux, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hakim Meshreki. I enjoyed our conversations preparing this webinar, and I am delighted to join you from Ithaca, New York. So good morning for me. I am delighted to be in Cairo virtually, a city, I love it. I'm from Barcelona in Spain, and reminds me of this Mediterranean flavor of Barcelona. So the outdoors, the cafes, and the smiley faces of people who enjoy being together. So thank you very much. So I'm going to start sharing the screen. We want to have a short introduction. We'll try to stay with about half an hour, and then we'll open the floor, as Professor Meshreki said, for question and answer. So the first one is why we decided to concentrate on the subject, and there is a pull and push as it happens. Both my colleague Anne Miroux and myself had done a lot of work in emerging multinationals. She was the director at UNCTAD in the Division of Innovation and Technology and was involved in the World Investment Report. And myself, in my previous life in INSEAD, I did a lot of work in multinationals from emerging markets, knowing and believing, both of us, that the role of the private sector is very important in the development of their own countries. So every country should and has, in most cases, a robust local private sector. So we started publishing a report, and we have here the 4 pictures of the 4 reports we have published and are available for free. You can download them for free from this link on emerging multinationals. The first one, the picture, is the enlargement of the Panama Canal, and the first ship that crossed the canal was a Chinese one, and the first title is the China Surge. So from then on, we realized that there is a divide between the growth of emerging multinationals from China, mainly in the last decade, and the rest. So, and then that's why we published at the end of last year, so it's a very recent book, this book, while most of the reports talk about economic growth of China, much less so has been concentrating on the fact that with economic growth has been the growth of the companies. So this is a very simple graph because we looked at the Fortune Global 500 ranking and how China is catching up. In fact, the data from this year has caught up with the US companies. And now, for the first time in the history of this ranking, a country that is not US is the one with most companies in this ranking. So it's clear that there is a tremendous growth, and there is clear that it started with the global financial crisis of 2008. You can see how the red line goes up after that. And Professor Meshreki was asking me what was the business model. The business model has been, still is, low cost to gain market share. And then from then on, some companies are starting to increase prices, but still the country is low cost, and the products from China always, in most cases, compete on lower price than equivalent product of the same quality in Europe or US or Japan. Okay, and I'll pass after this slide to my colleague. So again, Professor Meshreki asked us where these companies are the biggest in the world. So clearly banking, 4 out of the 5 biggest banks by assets, not by market cap. Even by market cap, ICBC is the second biggest bank in the world. The first one is JP Morgan. And the market cap changes over time. So they lead in banking, they lead in engineering construction, and some of them are in Egypt, building major construction projects, in mining, and interestingly enough, last year for the first time also in insurance. Ping An, a company that uses data analytics and technology to process claims in 2-3 days, sometimes in hours, is the biggest company in the world in the insurance. So another difference, and I pass the floor to Anne. Please, Anne.
Yes, can you share the screen?
Yeah, the screen is shared. Do you see it?
Yes, I see. Okay, then I will continue. So you will maneuver, you will
yeah.
Okay. So basically, in terms of the characteristics that Professor Hakim asked, is the main characteristic which most people know, at least based on the sample of the global 500, is a predominance of the state-owned enterprises. So that's basically the state as a major influence on the business sector, and it may even increase as time goes, and we may discuss that later on. So first element, a strong influence characteristic. The second element also, which is basically linked to the business model, is the fact that there has been, but we will see that may change, that has been the tendency for a Chinese company, when we say to sacrifice margin, but sacrifice is a big word. But the key point is definitely that the profit margin of Chinese firms is much below the profit margin of developed multinational, and in particular those from the United States. And here we have an example. It's well, it's part of the business model to some extent. Is first you extend the market so that you basically, it's not that you can control it, but the idea is to enlarge the number of customers, and that's what actually, for instance, Tencent is doing. One of the elements and characteristic is the price competition. And there in the book, we show that it's still very much the strategy of the Chinese company to conquer the market. First, you go on with prices. The reason, yes, is that you need to compare the market, but also the fact that the Chinese multinationals also operate a lot in other developing and emerging economies, and the consumer purchasing power is definitely different from more advanced economies. So the strategy is built around that price competition. But what we have noticed is that for some firms, there is also now the objective to reach the higher end of the market. And this is highly visible, for instance, in telecom and cell phone, for instance, prices. We did an analysis of cell phone, but also of a few other goods, white goods, fridge or air conditioners. And here on this graph, you see interestingly that in terms of prices, the most expensive Huawei phone is more expensive than the most expensive Apple one. And that's based, I think, on 2018 or 2019 prices. And this target, targeting the higher end of the market by Huawei is very visible, in particular in the Middle East, where in some of the malls, the most luxury boutique or shops are Huawei shops. If you take the Dubai Mall, for instance, it's very, very interesting to see that. But it's not only there, they go also in developed market. In London or in France, there have been very strong advertising campaign. And whether that will continue, given the situation now, is an interesting question. Actually, we can open later on. Also, because of that, there is the ability of these companies to dominate the market. As you might have seen on the previous screen, Huawei is now the second smartphone selling company above Apple. So this is really a major, major achievement, I would say, for a company which is still relatively young. That's also a characteristic of the Chinese multinationals. I won't dwell on that, but we discuss that in our reports and in our books. Next. When we talk about Chinese multinationals, some of them are very, very visible. You have Tencent, Alibaba, the Huawei, and so on that I just mentioned. But of course, it's part of a much broader phenomenon, which is that now China is a key global investor. In 2018, it was the second one. In terms of outward foreign direct investment flow, and in 2019, I think it was number 4 or number 3. So when you compare to 20 years ago, China was nowhere to be seen, and even in 2005, it was just beginning. So the country, in terms of outward expansion, the trajectory has been really remarkable from that point of view. Next. Now, China, in a way, there is a division of modes of entry. In emerging and developing economy, it's more greenfield. In merger and acquisition, it's more developed markets in a way, in terms of target. And that makes sense because in developed markets, you have some key company which in terms of strategy is essential for Chinese firms to acquire, to have easy and rapid access to the markets. In the green field, in emerging and developing economy, is more, I would say, basic, as you know, or natural resources investment. So it's not that there is a dichotomy, but there has been a difference in the mode of entry between the two. But interestingly, actually, in the case of greenfield, it's also interesting to see that the US, for instance, as years have gone, has become one of the top destination, at least up to 2018. Now we see a major change in the situation, but at least up to 2018-19, with the new administration decisions, kind of putting some barriers to Chinese entry in the US, then you see a difference. And since we are talking about Egypt, I want to have flagged the fact that Egypt actually is number 6 among the recipient of Chinese investment, and definitely the most important one very recently, right now, actually last year and the year before, in the Middle East. So, I mean, we could discuss that much later on, but there has been a substantial change as far as China is concerned in terms of directing its investment in Africa and the Middle East. And the last slide is about the objective of the book was basically to make known better Chinese multinationals and, how could I say, to explain some of the strategies. So we concentrated on 4 of them. I will go very quickly on that to leave more time for Lourdes to focus on the Middle East and Egypt. But we looked at ICBC, State Grid, Tencent, and Hainan Airline. And I will zoom only on 2. State Grid, which is basically, it was the second company in the world in the global 500 in terms of income. And it's a relatively unknown company, at least by name, in many markets, especially advanced markets. But it's the largest, by far, electricity company, much beyond Enel, EDF, or the Japanese Gail. So that gives you an idea of the power of some of these firms. And the other ones that we highlighted is Hainan, because we wanted to show that Chinese multinationals, like all multinationals, are prone to accident. And Hainan Airline is a very interesting firm, about 15 years old, who had, trajectory, phenomenal trajectory in terms of increase and development. It was a regional airline in China, and it became a very important international airline between China, the US, and parts of Europe, up to 2017, where the company began entering a number of challenges. And the reason, large reason, was that the company, like many Chinese firms, had gone on a spree of acquisition, perhaps too many, too fast, and had difficulty to digest. So when the wind turned, when the situation and the policies in China and abroad became more restrictive, the company was somehow strangled, and now it has basically sold most of its empire. So it's an example of also that it's a Chinese company which was doing very well, perhaps too fast, and like all multinationals, including from developed countries, basically stumbled and is now trying to recover. With the COVID crisis, it's even a more difficult challenge. I'll stop there and I will leave the floor to Lourdes to continue on China and Egypt.
Thank you very much, Anne. So Professor Meshreki asked us, okay, we have already one question regarding Alibaba. And yes, we decided Alibaba was better known than Tencent, and we decided to choose Tencent for the book. But definitely Alibaba has a tremendous power and is behind with Tencent in the tremendous success of mobile payments in China. For those of you who have visited the country, as you know, either you have you can pay by mobile or paying by cash, or even credit card is becoming something really strange. So both very innovative companies. Alibaba focused on connecting small companies with consumers, and as you know, AliExpress is all over the world. Regarding both revenues and market cap, smaller than Amazon, but regarding international reach, they have a much more important international footprint than Amazon. So a very interesting company to follow. And now they are going for an IPO for Ant Financial that is probably going to be the biggest IPO ever, being higher, with, I mean, more important revenues for the IPO than Saudi Aramco, that was till now the biggest IPO ever. So Professor Meshreki asked us to concentrate on China in the Middle East and in Egypt. So what has been interesting, number one, like the rise of Chinese multinationals, again, very fast. So things are done often very fast with China. The investments of China in Egypt have been recent and very fast. So if we look at the loans, so the 2016 IMF loan to Egypt was 12.5 billion. If we look at the total Chinese investments and loans and in development projects, we have a total investment, difficult to calculate sometimes because the loans are not often public information because are loans between governments. So it's between 16 and 20 billion. So Egypt, the fourth largest recipient in Africa. China is Egypt's main trade partner, and oil represents 63% of the total exports of Egypt to China. As is often the case, natural resources are the main product of exports to China for many countries. The investments have been also in infrastructure, energy, and telecommunications, and I'm going to mention some. Suez Canal investment zone is full of Chinese companies that have invested in the zone, also because the Suez Canal, and I'll mention this in a minute, have become a very important maritime route for Chinese ships. Then the light transit system connecting to the new capital is also being built by a consortium of companies for Chinese companies. Then solar power station near Aswan, and the China Harbor Excavation Company that has invested also 12 billion in ports. Sinopec, the oil company from China that has bought a local oil company as well. And then Huawei investments in 5G network. As following a presentation on this company, the company has become the biggest telecom equipment supplier in the world. It's the biggest companies. And in spite of all the technology war between the US and China, as Anne mentioned, Huawei has become number 2 in sales of a smartphone during this technology war, and at some point last month was number 1 above Samsung. If I ask the audience today which phones you have, many of the smartphones, I am sure, will be Chinese. The same would happen in Spain. The opposite is, of course, in US, where the leader is by far Apple. And then let's don't forget that tourism is very important source of revenues in dollars for Egypt, and the number of tourists, Chinese tourists, has gone up. Also, so why is important this relation? From China side, so let's remember that till not that long ago, Rotterdam was the biggest port in the world, and definitely is still one of the biggest. And now more and more the biggest ports are in Singapore and in China. But then when China launched the Belt Road Initiative, launched also the Maritime Silk Road. And if we look at the map, the Middle East plays an important role. This is because of history, thousands of years of history that has been so, and China wants to recover the role it had in an area where the trade was very important. And then for China to bring the goods to Europe is much faster to go through the Suez Canal. And then the Mediterranean Sea that had become a tourist destination in a place where you enjoy moving from Barcelona to Mallorca to get the thing, or in Croatia or in the Greek islands, now is a major trade area. So the Strait of Hormuz is key for China, and they have bought a number of ports. The Haifa port in Israel, Piraeus in Greece, Barcelona, they have a very important position in the Barcelona port, very important for the logistics of China. For China, in terms of energy, the oil is important. Also, China looks for geographical diversification. If we compare trade patterns and trade partners for US and China, or investment destination, both in greenfield and in M&A, we'll see that China has reached a much important geographical diversification than the US. Also, of course, now Egypt chairs the African Union. So again, very important for China. There are also threats, and one is Chinese investments in Ethiopia. Why? Because, you know, the Nile is such an important source of everything, water, energy, for the agriculture in Egypt, and definitely the investments in dams in Ethiopia is a cause of concern for Egypt. If we look at China, China is having, and is now in the press, if you look at Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, this is because the US is thinking of moving away from the Middle East. I mean, the troops, they're moving it away. So then there is all over the press saying China is going to occupy this space in the Middle East. Why is China interested in the Middle East? Again, energy. So China, most important imports of oil are from Saudi Arabia, 10% from Iraq, and 14.5% from Oman, Kuwait, and the UAE. Logistics from for the Belt and Road Initiative, not only the ports I mentioned, but also ports in Oman. Leading trade partner, so leading trade partner for Egypt, but overall leading trade partner for the Middle East, is the main investor, and of course for technology, because they want to sell technology. And then, and this will be the last slide, so China post-COVID and the Middle East. As you know, China is probably one of the few countries in positive growth at 2%. Egypt, the forecast for from IMF was positive. Now I see that is less positive than before, but still, so the forecasts say that Egypt will stay at 0.5% growth. China is increasing the soft power in this post-COVID world, and is trying to, and is doing it. We believe that because of the reasons that I mentioned, and because Egypt is a strategic partner for China, so China, and I mean, President Xi says it, that wants to strengthen its ties with Egypt in the Middle East. However, I wanted to caution, our opinion is asymmetry. For Egypt, China has become very important, but for China, because of the very important and very diversified in terms of geography, Egypt is less important. Egypt is a source of oil, and the Middle East as well, but I've seen China moving from Venezuela. Venezuela is now in turmoil in Latin America. Now is Brazil an important source of oil, and other countries. So there is an asymmetry here. So China is very important for Egypt. Egypt is important for China, but less so. And then one thing I've seen in Latin America, China was seen from a Latin America view. When they first came, they said, okay, China has been, still is an emerging market, is like us, and will have a different attitude. And now there is a change of mood. You see China more as more on a rivalry position, more than a friend. Of course, every country has to look for itself. In China, the only thing it does is looking for the 1.4 billion inhabitants that they have, which is normal. And Egypt, or Middle East in this case, or Latin America I mentioned, has to look for its own interest. I'll leave it here. So I put a link also to the reports that are free. They can be downloaded for free. And a lot of this information is in the EMI reports. And also we are having an upcoming book, Innovation from Emerging Markets, that will be published by Cambridge University Press before the end of the year. So I'm going to stop sharing. I see questions. So my question is for in the chat. My question is for Professor Meshreki. You post the questions or I have to type the answers?
No, I think you will be answering the questions live. So I'm going to read aloud the questions of the attendees, as well as I'm going to answer, say some questions as well. I have my own questions as well. So first of all, let me thank Professor Casanova and Professor Miroux for this lovely and interesting presentation full of information. Of course, the attendees have some questions that I would like to communicate. So a first question by one of the attendees was regarding, was all the growth that Chinese companies, multinationals have faced is contributed to the state level strategy, or is it a kind of a collaboration between the Chinese private sector and the state owned and so on? So what are the dynamics of this exactly?
Okay, I'll take this one. So one very important thing, okay, we wanted to make a short presentation and we removed that slide. But the first thing we have to remember is that Chinese companies have grown with China's growth. Very important. That's the number one. If we look at ICBC, ICBC is present in 47 countries and territories. When I looked at it, probably now more. But only 10% of the revenues come from outside. So still, because the size, the tremendous size of China, Chinese companies depend primarily of the size of their own country, and the growth of their own country is key. That's very important. So that's very important. They go abroad to look for natural resources, for knowledge, and for geographical diversification. So that's, again, we have to remember that. So their domestic market is the most important one. Did I answer your question? Maybe your question had another part.
Yes, and is there any sort of collaboration that happens between
So China designed, the Chinese government designed its own path of development. And the private sector, as Anne and I mentioned and believe, private sector is a very important part of the development. As you know, China vetoed the entrance of many technology companies because two reasons. One, security, and second, and very important, is that they wanted to develop their own farms. So China was sure, had a very protective environment of their own companies, of their own national champions. And yes, there was and there is a lot of collaboration in China between the government and the business sector. A lot. One, because many are state-owned, and two, because even the proper ones, there is a belief that these companies contribute to the development, so they have to collaborate with the government, for sure.
Are there any kind of, can we attribute this success as well to some of the government incentives and subsidies that they do to their state-owned company, to their companies, maybe even the private sectors as well?
Yeah, on that one, for instance, I think definitely the outward expansion of Chinese firm actually is, I would not say decided, but the government is first. I mean, they adopted the strategy in 2000, which is going out strategy. And suddenly everything opened. So it's very, very, very strong. And if you follow all the regulation, it may be a little intricate, but basically every part of the Chinese administration had some sort of regulation which would encourage or provide incentive to go abroad. And that applied to, of course, state-owned enterprises, but also to private enterprises. So that, that's the reason why. All the more, as you had, as Lourdes has highlighted in the presentation at the beginning, you had the global financial crisis, and suddenly you had available for purchase very interesting companies. So there is a very, very strong support of the Chinese government. The policies are coherent, they last. It's not 1 year this and the other one. I mean, it's coherent. It's a long-term strategy. Lots of patience, basically, and strength. So I think this is key in explaining why a Chinese multinational have been successful abroad.
Thank you very much. So I have another question from also one of the attendees who's asking, doesn't investment in the Ethiopian dam threaten Egypt and therefore can be something against the relationship between China and Egypt, in your opinion?
Okay, I mentioned that that's a point of friction. So I know that, okay, it's clear that it's a point of friction because the Nile, the river, is such an important part of the Egyptian economy. It's a point of friction. It's up to Egyptian government and Egyptian citizens to decide how to handle that. And I leave it at that. I won't answer anymore.
Okay, so I have also some questions. So one of the question would be on the premise that it's good to have multiple powerful states in the world. How would other emerging markets how can other emerging markets replicate China's success? Is it even possible to other emerging markets to replicate this success, to this approach?
This is it's an excellent, all questions are excellent, and this one is an excellent question. It's a question to be discussed for years to come. Everybody wants, okay, I often say, you know, this myth of Sisyphus, you know, the Greek myth of Sisyphus, that you push the stone up the mountain, and then the stone falls, and then you start again. I studied emerging markets for all my career for 30 years, and sometimes emerging markets in Egypt and Latin America and so many are like that. You think, okay, I'm there now, growth, and then COVID arrives, or then the currency goes down, and then debt crisis, and then you start all over again. So very difficult. However, China seems to have escaped in other markets. I would say even my country, Spain, was still relatively recently an emerging market. So is Korea, and there are success stories. Till now, it was seen that a big country like China or India is developing, but a much slower pace, or Egypt for that matter, big countries were more difficult to push ahead. And China has shown that yes, it is possible. It's a combination of the right government policy, a very vibrant business sector, very innovative, tremendous manufacturing power, trade power, power everywhere, and also the enthusiasm and the hard work of all Chinese. So you talk to Chinese, and definitely now they are proud of their country. They see the growth, they see the power, and Chinese, let's don't forget that. Chinese have sacrificed tremendously for the good of the country. Many other citizens of other countries have done so, but definitely, I don't know if Anne, you have worked at the UN. Yeah.
There are two elements that, I mean, I think it's very difficult to answer the question. You would need almost a full webinar. But there are two elements I would like to highlight. The first one is the size of the market. I mean, basically, China can do things that other countries cannot do. And actually, you know, what is happening now, even if China loses part of the foreign market, its domestic market is 1.5 billion people. Who can be that? I mean, that's already a first thing. No, but I don't want to bring despair to the smaller economies. So there is another element I would like to highlight and Lourdes touched upon that, is that the investment of China on education and then innovation. Innovation is key already for the past decade. There are a number of, announcement laws, you know, and innovation is almost everywhere. So it's not really a surprise. Plus, of course, building on a country which has basically a heritage I mean, if you look at many of the inventions come from China, so you have education and innovation, second point, and as I said a moment ago, a very coherent and very determined and very strong government policy. So these are three elements which explain partly the success of the Chinese government. And the question is that, is it replicable? The number one, definitely not. But the innovation and in education, there is something there. So, I mean, I just wanted to flag these three elements.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Miroux. So the following question would be, we have understood from the presentation that one of the key components of success of the multinationals is their, let's say, low price or sacrificing part of their margins to enlarge their market share and so on. Do you think that this approach is sustainable for the future, given that some of the countries, other countries with also a large population, for instance, India, can be replicating this? So how sustainable is this low-cost business model in the future?
Okay, let me just take it first. Yes, it's low cost, but it's tremendous quality and innovation. Again, so one of the questions was regarding Alibaba, but again, Tencent. So more and more, China is at the forefront in, I mentioned mobile payments, we can say robots, artificial intelligence, and now more and more electrical vehicles. China was never had the leadership in normal cars, but then in electrical vehicles, buses, mopeds, cars, definitely is there. Tesla is known everywhere, but definitely you have many leaders in China. So that's one thing. Second thing, very often we say that labor cost in China is increasing, so they won't be able to sustain, as you are saying, as the audience is saying, this model of low cost. However, China still has, I believe, around 400 million poor that still can maintain the low labor cost during a number of years. So let's not underestimate China. And also another very important factor is that not only China has low labor cost, but also logistics are seamless. So there were studies that shown that products from Brazil would take longer time to arrive to New York, and they are both in the Pacific, no, in the Atlantic, sorry, in the Atlantic, yeah. And then the goods from China, because of containerization, because how they dominate the maritime routes and the ports and everything. So then China is going to be able to maintain this low labor cost advantage for a while. My forecast, or our forecast. And you want to add something?
No, I would.
Yeah.
I'm good. Same line.
Okay. One very interesting question is that actually in Egypt and in a lot of countries, we're facing an increase, a strong increase in our population.
Yeah.
And it's mostly viewed or perceived as a negative aspect to the economy because it's we have to have more resources, more services, and the government has to prepare in its budget more financing to fund this population growth. But having heard your story, can we see it now as a positive thing happening or as a negative thing happening?
I think, okay. Yeah, there is increased population means that, and this is happening in India for sure, in Egypt, in other countries, needs that the government has to provide jobs for the young population to reduce unemployment in the young population. Okay, I think, okay, just one thing more. Overall, population is increasing, but it's going to reach a plateau and it's going down. These are the predictions of many people. But I think given China's power, I think size matters. So what was seen for a while as a handicap is now important. Size is important. definitely, because with size, you increase, hopefully, the size of your domestic market in a moment that protection is coming back. So definitely the size of your market is important. Smaller countries matter less than bigger ones. My opinion is that size is back in business, we are going to say. So China, US, European Union as a whole, let's hope that the European Union stays as a power, is important. Smaller countries have harder time to negotiate, to sit at the table. So yes, I think it's a plus.
Okay, I have another question, which is what is the QQ and usage in Chinese people / customer?
So definitely the QQ was what, is 10 cents. So definitely 10 cents, what has become is a conglomerate. So with 10 cents, you can fix your appointments with the hairdresser and also pay your bills, and not only pay when you go shopping, but also pay your bills, consult your doctor, have your appointments everywhere. So definitely what started like a smaller thing now has become not only, they have a bank, We Bank. So what started very small, like a chat, like a WhatsApp for China, has now become a conglomerate. Not only that, but both Tencent and Alibaba have a very important role as what we call corporate venture capital. So unlike the funds that we have in the US or in other parts of the world, in China, all the funding for startups comes from either Alibaba or Tencent or from the government. So by creating their own corporate ecosystems of startups, then they also is a way for them to keep innovating. So a source of innovation that comes from these startups that they found.
Okay. Very quick question. Somebody said China had plans to construct a railroad to bypass the Suez Canal through Eilat. Have these plans been scrapped or are they already going on?
Yeah, okay. Okay, a couple of things. China, to give you another example, you know, the Panama Canal is a major, another one, like the Suez Canal. I don't know where you have more traffic, I haven't checked, but definitely another major important logistic. So then China went to Nicaragua. So when the Panama Canal was built, there was another project in Nicaragua, which apparently could have been cheaper, faster, and less complicated. For a number of reasons, at the end, the decision was to build the Panama Canal. But now, China is saying, let's build the Nicaragua Canal. Again, this project is on and off. Is still, if you look at FDI markets, the data is still, the project is still there, has not taken place. The feasibility study has been done, so can be done. So these things, okay, another big project that related to State Grid. State Grid wants to build, so like we have the World Wide Web, the State Grid wants to build the electricity wide web, connect all the electricity networks all over the world. Why? Because they have a technology that they have high voltage. So through high voltage, they lose less electricity with the distance. That is one of the major problems. That's why you have dams and power plants of all kinds close by to the consumer. If their project becomes a reality, then we will be able to use solar panels from a desert anywhere in the world, the Gobi Desert in China, to reach Beijing or Shanghai. So yes, the Chinese have many projects. Will this happen? Remains to be seen. But again, there are these type of projects all over the world. I mentioned the Nicaragua Canal and others, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you. For moving from this a little bit political question to a more cultural question, where we have the owners of the Chinese companies are increasingly very young with very different mindset than their ancestors, fathers and grandfathers. How does that affect the business values and lifestyle in China? What would that lead? Would that lead to more democracy or not?
Wow. Anne and I try to stay away from politics. It's very difficult because politics are everywhere. So the second part of your question, I will not answer. We'll stay in economy and business. In economy and business. You have all types of leaders in Chinese companies. The technology companies have profiles that are very, very young still. Even, well, Alibaba, of course, the leader now is older, but when he started, he was very young, Jack Ma. Pony Ma, the leader of Tencent, now is older, but he started also very young. Often, technology companies have a profile that is similar. Okay, not similar all over the world, because the US technology leader is more flamboyant. Steve Jobs was a mythical figure. In China, beyond Jack Ma, the rest, we know them less. They are less visible in the world. They keep a more low profile that goes more with their values of humble, of community. So it's a very community-oriented, not individual. So the values are more community than collectivist. Exactly. Thank you. It's not yet 9 o'clock and I haven't had my coffee, so my words are a little bit sometimes. Yeah. So thank you. So the profiles, the profiles are very different. In general, I see the profiles. So I see Jack Ma more an exception than a rule. Even now, the leader of Huawei is in the news all the time. We know his daughter, but he has still, during all this confrontation, kept a low profile. So I see the values, Confucianism and all percolating all over in the business as well. We haven't mentioned this data point, but if you look at the salary of the CEOs of the biggest 500 companies in US or in China, the average salary of the CEOs is in the US is like, I don't know, I don't remember now, but like we looked at it and it was like 15 million. And in China, it's like 500,000. So it's not only that they are more individualistic, it's that also sacrifice their salaries for the good of the country. Also at the top.
Okay, thank you. Questions keep coming, and I'm cautious of time, but I know that we have at least 6 more minutes, so I'll try to ask as many questions as I can. So one interesting question is the following. China started by imitation, then to innovation. Is this how the success story should be in Egypt?
Anne, maybe you want to take this one.
Well, actually, in a way, it's true for China, but Lourdes and I and a group of economists, largely from Latin America, we are working on a book which is called Innovation from Emerging Market and in Emerging Market, and it's exactly like that, from imitator to innovators. Yes, in a way, I think it's part of the success. That is, you build upon what is existing and you bring your own additional value. So yes, definitely, especially, I mean, you need to look at the ecosystem of entrepreneurs, the university, and to some extent Egypt as that. I mean, there is a very strong, I would say, core of education. So if you want a blunt answer, I would definitely say, yes, part of the recipe is from imitation to innovation. We have, in this book, we have examples from Brazil, for instance, or from Argentina, or from Colombia. The innovation is not necessarily technological. It's also in the business model. It's also in the way how you address and you serve your customers, for instance, in your particular country, given their characteristics, which is actually what China has been doing. A lot of innovation, which there are a lot of innovation in China, which what I would call technological innovation, kind of, in artificial intelligence, in electric vehicle, for instance, in electricity with state grid. There are, I mean, it's not everything is not copied or imitated, as sometimes, you know, the saying goes in the press. So there are very strong technological innovation in China, but there are also very strong business model innovation. Tencent, for instance, which connects all this application, all this activity that you can do on your smartphone. So business model innovation is very, very important. And we see that a lot, for instance, in Latin America. Yes, from imitation to innovation is one way of success.
Thank you. So I have another interesting questions keep coming, and that's great. Now, one question would be, you've mentioned that in your last discussion that there is a sacrifice that was made by the Chinese to help the growth of the country, which is a very great cause to do a sacrifice. But while I'm sacrificing, I need as well to enjoy a good standard of living. So do you think this level of sacrificing affected the standard of living of Chinese, given that the economy is growing? So my economy is growing, but I'm not having a good standard of living. So what do you think the balance happened, or how people are taking this?
So I work also with Chinese scholars, and in one of the last calls, a collaborator, so he said, yes, I am at home because I'm confined. And I could see, you know, a very small, really small, like a room where he was living. And I thought, oh my God, the equivalent in Europe or US would live much, much better. So there is definitely a sacrifice in the way of living of many Chinese who work many, many hours and for the good of the country. I see that. At the same time, if I look at, again, Egyptians, or Middle Easterns, or Africans, everybody works very, very hard. So an average worker in an emerging market or in a developed market, probably not, for sure, the one in the developing country or in the emerging market will work longer hours. The question is how collectively this hard work is organized, is aligned with a bigger goal. Because again, if you are cutting is the thing of, are you cutting a stone or are you building a cathedral? If the government allows you and directs you to build the cathedral, the cutting of the stone will be much more productive because it goes to this higher goal. So hard working is not enough. And those who say, okay, you know, Chinese work harder. I believe Egyptians and Brazilians and work harder, work as hard. The difference is that, as Anne said, the government policies have been very efficient and have been able to bring all this hard work in the right direction, on the right fields, at the right moment, and have helped that.
And just another small thing, I mean, the so-called sacrifice were kind of accepted because the real income increased substantially. For instance, we have some data which says that between 1980 and 2018, the per capita income was multiplied by 16. So in a way that, you know, encourage people, because you have to see in a way where they were coming from. And that's, yes, that's the challenge of the future to some extent for the Chinese government, is to keep that level of progress so that people are happy. So I think if we put that into perspective, it helps to understand why, in a way, we have the impression that the Chinese did sacrifice. Is that because what they got in exchange was remarkable in a way in terms of their GDP per capita and their way of living also.
Okay, I think I will take one more question because we're off time. So one last question is, what do you think the Chinese progress would be after COVID-19? Would they be able to replicate their progress after the 2008 economic crisis to the post-COVID era or not? That's my last question because of the sake of time, and I apologize for the rest of the people who have asked questions.
Okay, in the 2008, Chinese growth didn't change, was 10%, 11%, nothing. And at that time, China was able then to pull other emerging markets because the demand for natural resources and others was tremendous and never went down. This time is too early to say. This time, number one, the crisis is really global, affects absolutely every country in the world. Second, yes, China is in positive territory. It seems that it's going to be growing at 2%. 2% is not enough to pull the rest of the world and the rest of the emerging markets. That's one thing. So it will probably not be the same engine of growth that was before for other emerging markets. Second, is definitely too early to say. This crisis is different. The COVID is still here. So many countries are facing second waves or the same wave that never went away. So it's a little bit too early. So far, China has been clearly the country in the world that has been able to recover the normal, almost normal, not normal, but definitely activity levels pre-COVID in many things, including air travel. That is really, really low all over the world still. Anne, you want to add something?
No, I think even time.
Well, by this question, I would like, first of all, to thank Professor Casanova, Professor Miroux for this lovely webinar, these lovely answers to the questions, insights. I'll wrap it up with just one sentence. Let's focus on, as Egyptians, on innovation, higher education, a little bit collective sacrifice to the reason of our country, and focus on offering value, which is the main trade-off between the benefits and the sacrifices our customers would get. And I think we will be getting there. Once again, thank you for this interesting thing. Thank you for all the audience who have attended. And we're looking forward to having more of our Willard Brown seminars in the future. Have a pleasant day all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And congratulations to American University, because it's playing a very important role in Egypt's education and Egypt's development. So that's a very important institution. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Meshreki. And thank you, Safa, for organizing everything.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll leave it there.